Hey guys, welcome back to Out of Our Minds. Today is a very special episode because we just interviewed our first guest together, the two of us, which was fascinating. And actually, the way that this interview came to be was so purely intuitive and actually kind of unplanned. Basically, who you're about to hear from is a woman named Kat Daou, who is a family constellation therapist, or FCT for short. And one of my friends, also named Nikki, shout out to Nikki Nuremberg, had done session with Kat and was like completely mind blown by it. It's basically a modality that helps you to heal generational trauma, to explain it briefly. And in the episode, we go super into depth about what it's like, what Nikki and I's experience was, and kind of the different like elements of FCT. But in terms of how this came to be and why it has felt so aligned, is Nikki and I both went into doing an FCT session blind. Basically, we were kind of like, yes, this sounds cool. This sounds aligned for us. Let's go for it. And the result was just honestly pretty mind-blowing. We both came away with such unique but profound experiences that really had to do with healing our own generational trauma, family dynamics, relationship things, like really just understanding the baggage and energy and the things that we have carried with us, and it really gave us tools to step forward with that. And in terms of the conversation today, it was incredibly fascinating in that I feel like for this community, it's the perfect combination of having that intention to like want to do the work, to want to be the cycle breaker, which we talked about a lot, and what it feels like to be the black sheep, but to really break that down into what it actually looks like when you put that into practice. And there was definitely moments of the conversation that I was just like mind blown and like felt like we went down the path that really speaks to the kind of like unseen and what it really doesn't get talked about that much, like this level of healing work and self-discovery and just like the new almost like therapy modalities that people are using that actually have ancient origins.
Right. And you'll hear us talk about everything from our own personal experiences with the sessions. We dive into the topic of epigenetics and also this idea on how our trauma is actually passed down in the body, the difference between soulic trauma, which is trauma that is passed down from soul to soul, from your soul, one soul, I should say, and then also the trauma that's passed down ancestrally through your bloodline. So we dive into all these different topics, and just to give you guys some insight into what the actual session is like with Kat, it was crazy. It was pretty wild. Essentially, you kind of share with her your understanding of your family system and your story of who you are within your family. And you stand on these pieces of paper that are labeled 1 through 5. So essentially she taps open the field, and as you stand on each paper, you do not have the awareness around what that paper symbolizes, but you stand on the paper and you tap into your own energy and emotions and what's coming through your channel, and you kind of just spitball it out to her, and she writes it all down, and you go from number to number, and it's pretty wild the shift in energy that you feel as you're stepping onto each paper. There was a part of my session where the energy on one of the papers was so heavy and fear-based and scary that I felt this like resistance to even putting my foot on it. And then once I was there, I had to like really like breathe through it because it felt so dense. And it ended up being not what I thought it was.
Yeah,
that was like the part.
Totally, yeah, it is a totally different modality than usual talk therapy, and it's, to me, it basically combines all the elements of like energetic healing, physical healing, like mental, emotional, like understanding logically things, but then bringing them way, way, way deeper. And I think it just pierces through. It basically just goes beyond the day-to-day ways that we interact with ourselves, and it goes extremely deep in a way that allows you to have so much more understanding and like felt sense of, you know, your healing journey and whatever it is that you're working through. Yeah, it was just very beautiful, and this conversation is really one to kind of bring a lot more awareness to the healing journey that has to do with not just yourself as an individual, but really with your family dynamics, in partnership, in community, in anything generationally that you may have been passed on to, and even just understanding your lineage and the role of family, not just like physically and how we interact with our family, but also energetically in this like soul sort of DNA way, which was mind blowing and something I want to read more about, because it's like the piece of it that I think it's the missing piece in a way, because it's like when the logic mind doesn't, finish doing the job of healing, so to say, finish the job, quote unquote, like it feels like this part, like the soul DNA, the unseen, is where the work really lies.
Truly. Yeah. It gives you such a deeper understanding. You guys are really going to enjoy this, especially if you're someone who identifies as the black sheep and the cycle breaker within your family. So sit back, enjoy, and get ready to have your mind blown.
Yeah, it was awesome. So yeah, enjoy, guys. Thank you so much for being here. If you're new to the show, you're someone from Kat's world, welcome. We are so glad to have you. We talk a lot about all different sorts of spiritual topics on this podcast, from self-discovery to different rabbit holes of consciousness and the ways that we can explore the subconscious, cultural topics. We kind of cover it all, but all through the lens
Taylor
of
Swift.
consciousness. Taylor Swift. That's right. We'll do it all, but all through the lens of really consciousness and spirituality and anything, whatever that means to you. So welcome, enjoy. And as usual, if you like this, make sure you hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you can get new episodes every week on Wednesday. And we will see you on the next one.
What's up, guys? I'm Nikki.
I'm Bella.
And this is the Out of Our Minds podcast, a playground for mystics and self-explorers to journey through the vast realms of the universe, cultural landscapes, and spiritual expansion.
Join us weekly as we dive into thought-provoking discussions that unveil the mysteries of existence and nurture the growth of our consciousness.
I would love to start with understanding, in your eyes, there's this word and trend and idea in the wellness world of healing, and it has taken on so many different forms. It means something different to everyone. It's practiced differently by every single person who goes on a healing journey, and I would love to know, what does healing in its truest form mean to you?
Wow, this is such a strong way to start, but I think that it's such a great topic. I'm getting EMDR done right now, and my therapist was like, what does healing look like to you? So I feel like I was kind of mentally prepared for this. I don't believe that everyone is fully healed, because I think that that's not something we're here to experience on Earth. We come here as souls and choose certain human bodies that are predisposed to certain things that are going to help us on our evolution. And so I think that healing is more like being so radically honest with ourselves and aware of our internal experiences and what shaped those internal experiences, how those internal experiences are creating our environment and the choices we make and the way that we choose to live. And then when we find something we want to heal, then creating tools in our toolbox to help us navigate those more difficult times. And I think that, with Family Constellation Therapy, I've definitely experienced being really totally healed from certain things. However, it was within that one lens. If I zoom out, it's one part of a whole of things that I'm healing. And so for me, I struggle with OCD and intrusive thoughts. And so that's a product of war trauma, which is, I'm a second generation, I guess you call it like survivor of war trauma. And for me, with the OCD and intrusive thoughts, I really don't think I'm ever going to truly fully heal from them. But what I can do is go to EMDR and get a therapist who's aware of how to give me tools to deal with the OCD and the intrusive thoughts, and have a meditation practice and do the work that I'm doing in all sorts of ways, so that when an OCD intrusive thought does come up, I'm like, okay, it doesn't hit me as hard as it used to. I'm aware of how to move through this. I can pause. I don't have to spin out of control because of it. And I can really step out of the trigger and then move through it in a different way. It doesn't mean that it's going to go away forever. It just means I respond differently. That's, I think, what healing is to me. But again, I have seen myself like heal certain parts of the journey. It just shows up differently. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. And I think that really resonates with me personally for sure, because I think what's really interesting and what can get so almost difficult in a healing journey is this expectation that it can be one and done, or that we do one session and like we're good to go. But what happens there is, as you're saying, something can happen in the future, or you can experience another version or symptom of whatever the ripple effect of an experience is, or a generational, trauma that you've taken on, and it'll come up again and you'll think, oh my God, something's like wrong with me, or I'm like, broken forever. And it's funny that by actually accepting the fact that it is a journey, it's not really a destination, and that it's just this continuous showing up to acceptance of yourself, that actually is the most healing part of it, is almost like not feeling like you need to completely get rid of it, or that the wound needs to completely go away, right? Like physical wounds, once they're quote unquote healed, there's still a scar and there's still like a little bit of evidence of it, or it'll still be a tender spot. So I feel like that's a very liberating way to look at it, instead of what some of us have been sold as, like this idea of, oh, once you're healed, everything you want comes to you, or you need to do this work in order for you to receive the abundance or success that you want. And it can be really frustrating and almost be like a different symptom of, or different version of what already got us to a place of lack and unworthiness, is thinking that, oh, we have to like figure out every single wound that we have in order to experience, the beauty of life.
I honestly couldn't agree more. And I think that the power of the mind is something that once you can harness how the mind can actually support you rather than being almost like a slave to it, then you can really truly work with the power of how it can help you shift your experience, which ultimately is affected, by your internal experience too. So I think it's just, I love the way that you said that.
I'm curious for you to kind of drop us into more of this experience that you have trauma due to ancestors and their activity in war. Would you be able to share more of your view on ancestral trauma? And then, of course, you can kind of lean that into sharing more about family constellation therapy.
Yeah, I think what I hear in that question is like kind of two questions. It's like, what is FCT? What is family constellation therapy? And like, what is ancestral healing? And then how does it get passed down? And they're so different. So I kind of will address the first one. And family constellation therapy is ancestral healing, and it's a very unique way to approach ancestral healing. It's basically a way to identify hidden dynamics within a family system. And the way that I like to describe it is that, we look at what happened to your family, and then how is it also unconsciously happening in you too. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking at, in a family constellation therapy session, you're suffering from a symptom, a lack, a block, a belief. You're not seeing yourself move forward in your life. And so my job with you is to go back in time and talk to you about what may have happened that have basically been baggage that you've carried, and you're carrying it as your own, but it actually belongs to someone in the lineage. And when that trauma goes unhealed and unacknowledged, it gets just naturally like passed down to each generation. And like I said, we call it our own. And so I think, I look at family constellation therapy from really two important perspectives. I have to first acknowledge that there is a deeply epigenetic or physical part of the work that we do, which I can totally start geeking out about that and going down like a rabbit hole with that. But we have to look at that and how trauma gets passed down through the DNA of who we are. And that's a huge part of why our soul chose us to come into, to inhabit, because there's something about our human predisposition in our DNA and what our ancestors have been through that is ultimately in service to what our soul needs to learn and experience to grow. And then there's also the energetic part of it that's a little bit harder to grasp in certain ways, but It's the field part of it, where you stand onto these papers and you literally channel your ancestors and your family members or even your future self. And you get to get a peek into who, what, where, when, and why, and what's contributing to you ultimately feeling like you can't move forward. And I always say that if you feel blocked in an area of your life and you feel like you've never been able to move forward from it and you've thrown everything at it, EMDR and therapy and, neurofeedback and manifestation work and whatever you want to say, like you threw it at it and you're still not finding any clarity, it's because there's an ancestral energy that you're a part of due to a trauma that happened that is actually preventing you from moving forward. And there's an opportunity to heal it for yourself, but also heal it for the lineage. So the way that my mentor always described it that made the most sense to me is like your family system is like a hose. And when there's a kink in the garden hose, things like, war, which we talked about, trauma, loss, miscarriages, stillborns, early deaths, like other big T, little t traumas that happen, prevent that hose from bringing life force energy into the family system. And that's what we're looking for, is we're looking to heal the trauma to bring that life force energy back into the family system so that you get to be in the front of your lineage and receive all that you're here to receive without being blocked by what happened to your family.
So beautiful.
Is there an aspect of this that is, to me, feels almost like a lost art or like a lost tradition? Because in our modern families and this modern generation that we're in, it's really rare to find a young person who has been taught this idea that like, hey, the things that you're experiencing, the blocks, the those like clouds that you feel like you can't get rid of, maybe it's because of an ancestor or something you experienced when you were younger. I mean, a lot of people now focus on the personal experiences that we have as children and how that impacts us when we're older. But then there's this whole element of the lineage and the ancestry and how that gets passed on. And I know that there's some, I believe, shamanic aspects to FCT, or at least that you use in your practice. And I'm really curious what that sort of, what I would call like a lost art form or like a lost healing modality is, and how I think there's a reason why so many people are interested in it now, because clearly our understanding of our family systems and how we inherit those things is not fully quote unquote working for us, in that people don't know that they can actually look to the story of their family history to understand themselves, because it's not a concept to us that, it could literally be in your body, in your field, and preventing you from stepping forward.
1,000%. I was just having a conversation with someone this morning about this, and the way that I like to describe it is that family constellation therapy is the root chakra of our healing, collectively and then individually. I think our society has been so enlightened by like spiritual awakening and like everyone's an intuitive and everyone's a psychic and everyone's turning on these beautiful pieces of their natural nature of their soul, right? Like we all have these abilities. Intuition is just a muscle that some of us choose to practice more than others. But really, truly, when we want to understand ourselves, we have to go to our root. And our root includes family. And when you look at it from a lineage perspective, family constellation therapy is like the root chakra of our healing. And we have to go back to where we come from, because being disconnected from our root means not knowing what happened in the past that's affecting us today, energetically and epigenetically. So I love the way that you kind of said that it's kind of a lost art. It actually originated from the Zulu tribes in Africa. And this German priest who denounced his priesthood to basically modernize family constellation therapy, but he went down to the Zulu tribes and he saw that this was happening and he was so taken back by it. It was such a phenomenology to him. He didn't understand how it worked, but he just knew that it did. People would gather in groups and be a part of this collective healing in the tribe, and there was actual healing happening, and people could speak to it and see it and believe it. And so he took it back to Germany and he modernized it and created the Bert Hellinger School of Family Constellation Therapy. And that's really how it's been spreading on a more modern spectrum. But what I love about FCT is that the field that we're working in is a consciousness field. And the consciousness field really works with whatever way each facilitator, or I like to think artist for this modality, prefers to use it. So like I have my clients stand on pieces of paper and then they embody their family member. My mentor used to use foam feet, small ones, big ones, medium ones, just to kind of understand the energy. I know of a woman who does it with horses. And then some girl on Instagram just followed me recently who does it with water. I do not know how she does it with water, but she does it with water. So I think that what's beautiful about it is that there's so many different mediums you can use to understand family dynamics. It doesn't have to be, and then of course there's the obvious one, which is people, groups, and stuff like that. So it is really beautiful to see how the field works through each facilitator and also who's drawn to each kind of way that it's facilitated as well.
When you say the field, will you explain that for people?
Yeah, so the field is basically like a consciousness field. So whenever I refer to the field, I'm referring to like one specific thing, but sometimes I'll use it with like simultaneous things. But the field is what we know to be the morphogenic field, or we call it in family constellation therapy like the all-knowing field. And this is where I think a bit of faith and believing in some kind of higher power is really, really important. But I always like to liken it to a source field, a universal consciousness field, or even like if you want to call it, and sometimes it's vibes with me and sometimes it doesn't, but like a God field. You can choose whatever wording you like. You could call it Wonder Woman for all I care, as long as you have a faith that you're going to stand on these papers and you will embody a family member or whatever the situation is. But this field basically carries all the universal consciousness around what's happened, what hasn't happened, what's been said, what hasn't been said. And so when I do my constellations and when we're in the field, I will refer to the papers on the floor as the field, but actually that's because it's where the energy field is working on, is in those papers. And so as soon as you step on the paper, you embody each individual representation of the paper. And then as soon as you step off, you come back into your own energy and it neutralizes whatever experience you had on that paper. And I always do my constellations blind because I never want someone to go onto a paper with preconceived notions about a family member or a situation. It's much more magical and honest and vulnerable to just be on each paper for what it is. And that's it.
Yeah. Maybe Nikki and I can both share what that experience felt like going into it, because I know for me, I kind of purposefully, I didn't do a lot of research or reading. I just wanted to go into it basically blind with like a general idea of what was going to happen. I definitely am someone who, I mean, every person listening, by the way, we reference our listeners as the Omis. So if you hear that term, we're not speaking gibberish. That's our community. I feel like all the Omis would be open to this, but for sure, I'm someone who is generally inclined to just having a belief in the unseen and even just a belief in things that are waiting to be proven to me, for example. So anyway, going into it, I feel like the way I would describe it off of what you just said is almost like it's like a quote unquote place that is free of the constraints of physical time and space, and you're able to step into the really unseen, usually unfelt aspects of who we are. And yeah, what's really beautiful and what I found to be so profound in this experience was actually feeling the doubt the second I stepped on the first piece of paper, and I was like, okay, what the fuck's gonna happen here? Like, what is going on? Like, I'm not getting anything. And then all of a sudden, the second the belief is the disbelief is suspended, that I actually almost like surrendered to the visceral feeling that I started to get in my body. And I know it's different for everyone depending on, you know, what's coming through, who you're connecting with. But number one, the aspect that the fact that you don't tell us, you know, who, where, what paper is signified by what the papers signify, also lets, I feel like, the soul really come into the driver's seat to just experience it the way it's meant to be. And for me, it was just really a confirmation that so many of the truths of this life are not meant to be explained by a string of words. It's almost impossible to, and that the most profound healing and transformation and alchemization process is literally in the indescribable, and it's just what is happening in your body, in your mind, in your visuals, in whatever sense is present for you. And it's funny because I was trying to explain it to my boyfriend later, and I was like, I'm not even going to try to accurately explain like what happened, but it felt so resonant in my body, and it felt as real gets. And it was just an experience that really proved to me that there's just more to this existence than the 3D, than what we can feel and touch and understand and write down. And I love that feeling of finding something that speaks to the indescribable. It's really, I think, what is the beauty of life, is to experience that. And from a healing perspective, it changed the game. Honestly, I've never experienced anything like that illuminated so many light bulbs for me.
Well, what you're describing is the felt sense. And the felt sense is basically a knowing in your body and a resonance in your body that you know something, feel something, sense something. You don't know how, you don't know why, it doesn't make any sense, but you know that you feel it. And I always tell people, and I'm sure I told both of you this going into it, like, it's not going to make sense, and that's okay. It's not supposed to make sense. Your job is not to make sense of it. That's my job. I'm kind of the behind the scenes director, kind of taking all these things that you're saying on a paper and making it make sense. All you have to do is just feel. That's your job. And you're the one that's channeling. And it gives, I think, a sense of empowerment and liberation for somebody to say, oh, I didn't ever consider myself to be that intuitive, but I can do it, because look what I just did. Look what I can feel. I can tap in. And it's also possible too that you can get on a piece of paper and not feel anything, and that has nothing to do with you other than whatever's on that paper doesn't feel. Because I've had people that have had crazy trauma, can't even meditate because they can't go into their subconscious because it's not safe. They've been in the field before, and they've been able to feel something. It doesn't have to be this crazy experience, but they at least feel something, right? It's safe for them to have that felt sense. So no matter what you experience on the papers, it's such a representation of what that paper means rather than your own ability to channel and be intuitive. They're totally separate.
I have a question with the feeling, because for me, it was so visceral as well. I remember there were a few papers that I was scared to step on because of how I was perceiving them, and also how they felt even from like a little bit of a distance. And I'm curious, when you're saying like the feeling and tapping into the field, is it that we are channeling the energy of that family member, or are we tapping into the energetics and like the DNA within us that is holding already that frequency?
I love this question so much. The way that I understand it is the first part of that. When we stand on the paper, if I'm standing on paper number 2 and it's my mom, I'm going to literally experience mom's feelings, emotions. You know, whatever mom says on that paper, you'll even know that after you come off the paper, I address that paper as mom. When you were mom on that paper, this is what you did, because it truly is mom. However, what you touched on around having a resonance of something with someone else and sharing that energy, that actually has a lot to do with how trauma is passed down from each generation, and also the ripple effect that we feel after a session, and how the work that we're doing energetically ripples out into other people who also carry a piece of that energetic DNA. And it's like, I can't even tell you how many times. No, it's really crazy. Yeah. Like, I did an FCT around something 2 weeks ago. From that day until yesterday, I swear, I do not know what kind of fucking portal I unlocked, but there is stuff coming out left and right with my family. I'm like, oh God, I should slow down. I need to stop doing so many of these. I'm like, what is going on? But it's because everybody carries a piece of it. And so if you see a crazy ripple effect happen in your family because of something you're addressing, power to you. Oh my God, like bowing down to you, because you chose to address something that everyone else is suffering from. Truly. Like, that's the power of being a cycle breaker, is that it's not just about doing things differently. You're actually changing a part of your energetic and epigenetic DNA on like a crazy level.
Can you talk more about being a cycle breaker? Because I feel like a lot of the Omis can relate to that label of maybe being the black sheep or the cycle breaker.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a really weird position and role to play in the family system. It can feel super isolating. For me, I always felt different than my family. I always felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I saw the world really differently from everyone. But because I had a need to belong and bond to my family, which is something that FCT addresses, how do we bond and belong to our family in maybe ways that aren't helpful and healing, but we have to stay connected to them. So I did a lot of that growing up. I started shifting my beliefs, turning off my intuition, and kind of shifting and changing who I was because of that black sheep outsider feeling that I had. So I turned 26, 27, and I was in a emotionally abusive relationship, very toxic, loveless marriage. I was working in a job that I wasn't sure I was fully aligned with. Basically, I looked around at my whole life and I was like, none of this is what I would want. It looks good from the outside, but none of this is what I would want. And I think holding the role of black sheep, I was so scared to break away from letting other people decide what my life should look like for me and having my own sense of self and beliefs, because it meant I was going to break away from the family. And so I had to do it really slowly. And so eventually I found FCT, and then I started shifting my life. I left my old job. I'm in a different relationship now. Like I got divorced. And it's like these little baby steps that you have to make as a cycle breaker. And I like to say that you maybe start off as a black sheep, but then you realize you kind of have these awakenings inside of you, this little voice, your inner guidance. It's like, hey, are you sure you want to be doing that? Hey, don't you want to try that differently next time? Or maybe you should look into this. It's kind of that inner pulling, right? You start to align with things differently. And then you slowly move from being a black sheep to being a cycle breaker, because being a cycle breaker is being liberated from the things that have held you back. Being a cycle breaker is having radical self-awareness and also radical honesty with yourself about how you may be repeating certain patterns and how you don't want to do it anymore. And I think that society has really kind of put on a pedestal the idea of a cycle breaker without actually defining what that cycle breaker is. It's not just doing things different. It's choosing to show up in ways that your family didn't have the courage to show up. It's about changing your belief system to align with your own sense of self and what your soul is here to be, because your soul didn't choose your family for no reason. Your soul went into life selection before it reincarnated and was like, that girl, Kat Daou, she is perfect for what I need to do next. Oh my God, that's it. I've decided. That's it. Everyone approves on it. The moment of conception happens and you're there, right? So it's like we have to trust the reasons that we're in these families. And I don't want to spiritually bypass anyone's pain by saying that, but there is a huge component to the reasons why we are here. And I believe being a cycle breaker means choosing to see that our families have always been in service to us, have always been in service to our evolution and our growth. And the more that we embrace that belief, the more that we're able to depersonalize what happened to us and realize that we're more empowered than we think we are.
So powerful.
Wow. I really think the way you're explaining being a black sheep, being a cycle breaker, beyond what we think it is, because there's this almost shadow expression is like a term I like to use in explaining these positive intentions that can come out in ways that don't actually help us. And one of those is when we use, make your boundaries and cut these people out and fuck everyone who doesn't see you, right? Like, obviously there's cases where it could be perfectly aligned and makes sense to no longer associate with certain people, whatever it is. But I actually think sometimes we use it as like a scapegoat to actually confronting the situation that we have incarnated into by saying that, I just do things differently. I'm the black sheep. Nobody gets me. Bye. Like, I'm going to do my thing. And like talk to the people that, you used to associate with. And sometimes it's actually missing an opportunity to be like, well, if I am here to break a cycle, wouldn't it be so much more powerful and healing to actually have the courage to face the scenario that my soul chose and to be really in it, like in the mud, doing the work that I feel called to do, instead of potentially just, running from it, for lack of a better term. Like, I think that is something that a lot of people face, is when you really do have a difficult scenario, a difficult family situation, a, difficult childhood, whatever it was, whatever scenario that you're in, that there's like almost this trendy glamorousness to just cut it all out and never, go back to it again. And I do think there can be so much wisdom and healing and beauty in challenging yourself to actually face it and be in it, and not just heal yourself and move on with your life, but explore healing yourself so that it heals other people around you. Because that experience of, I had this similar thing after our session, is it illuminated so many things about my family dynamics that I had really never thought of. And I'm someone who, I look back at my childhood, and this is something I shared with you in depth. I really feel so blessed with the childhood I had, with the memories I have. I'm so close with my family. Like, I have, from an outsider's perspective, like just a great situation that you would be like, you should have no problems. Like, you're good. You're like an untraumatized person. But we don't realize that the subtle energy of even being in a close, tight-knit family, which is something we explored, that I didn't realize how even just subtly in my body, having the model of spending all my time with loved ones and going on adventures together, that because in my relationship we're busy and we can't spend as much time together, that was associating for me like that my relationship was in, failing, or was a problem. And it's fascinating because when you learn more about your family dynamics, no matter what they are, they totally ripple out and then change the nature of the other relationships. Like, I went home for Thanksgiving and just noticed so many more things coming up to the surface. I was like, damn, universe is giving me an opportunity to like heal this relationship, to like practice, the revelations that I had in the FCT session. And even the dynamics with me and my partner changed. And it's like, you don't know how to explain them other than the fact that you are now walking around with a different energetic signature that people are going to pick up on unconsciously or consciously.
And that is a testament to the energy that you shift. You are truly shifting your energy in a session. It's not just, things and you're like, great, I know things about my family. You're actually changing the imprint of what your family looks like. And so that's what we do at the end of a session when we put your parents back behind you and we put you in front. We're literally saying, parents, this is where you belong. This is your role. I'm no longer going to carry this anymore. And I'm going to put myself right here because this is my role. This is my order that I belong in my family. And I think if we can backtrack a bit, you touched on something that I really, really want to touch on, if that's okay.
Sure.
Family Constellation Therapy is all about bringing love back into the family system. Mm. It's all about love. And anyone that you talk to that is very steeped in this work will tell you that love is the only thing that helps you move forward. Mm. It's the only thing. So when we're working within a family dynamic where someone is estranged from their family and they have valid reasons to be estranged from their families, you don't have to be lovey-dovey and best friends with your people in your family that have crossed your boundaries and hurt you. What you can do is send them love, have boundaries, and then do that healing love for yourself. Because you are, as a cycle breaker, you are the energetic conduit for changing the ways that the energy of trauma lives in your family system. And when you say yes to doing this work, it is a huge initiation into healing ancestral trauma and healing your family. So you can still be estranged from your family for valid reasons, but also being a cycle breaker is not just being like, peace out, I need boundaries, you annoy me, bye. It's like, no, why? Like, why? Someone on TikTok, actually, I posted this video and they were like, well, my cousin stole a bunch of money from the family, and was like listing all these things. And she's like, well, what do you suggest I do? And I said, ask why. Why do you think he thinks that's okay? Who taught him that that's okay? What happened in the family system? Where's their money trauma? Why is lying and cheating okay? Who was in survival mode? If you don't understand why certain people act certain ways in your family, you will personalize the shit out of everything that they do, and you will carry it around and be like, oh my God, everyone hates me in my family. Maybe no one gives a shit. Maybe it's all about them being in their own stuff, and they're just throwing it at whoever wants to deal with it because they can't carry it alone, because inside of them is a wounded inner child or is a wounded human being who is trying to fill those holes with something. We're all that, by the way. Like we all do that. I'm not saying we're better than anybody else. We are all guilty in some way of doing that with other people. But by being a cycle breaker, you're choosing to say, I see this. I understand why this happened. I'm choosing to have compassion for myself and possibly the person that hurt me. And I'm willing to do things differently because I know about what happened in the past. I think that's the powerful part that really made me think, okay, we need to differentiate between people who estrange themselves and people who just say, I'm a cycle breaker. I just chose to do it differently because I want to. It's like, well, why? Let's look at why.
How do you believe that doing this work allows us to have deeper levels of like compassion, like you're saying, for other family members?
So this is where I'm still at a very deep point of acceptance with where I'm at on my journey with these things. So please know I'm vulnerably sharing while I'm also trying to wrap my head around Spirit's message to me around this. I've been initiated and called into something called Christ consciousness. And as somebody who was raised as a Catholic, I did not vibe with Jesus for most of my life. I'm 32, almost 33 next month. And for 31 years of my life, did not give a shit about Jesus, religion. Like I mean, you know, at some point in my life I did, but it was when Spirit said, you need to start learning about Jesus and Christ consciousness. I was like, I don't vibe with this at all. And they're like, great, remove Jesus and look at it from the level of understanding, compassion, forgiveness, and love. Where can you bring those four things into yourself, into your family, and into the work that you do? And Spirit's always kind of like joking with me a little bit, like, okay, you know, now I'm totally cool with Jesus, and I had like a whole thing where I like healed my relationship, and now he's like my cool brother that like I work with all the time. But like in general, if Christ consciousness and Jesus doesn't resonate with you, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, and love are the most healing values that I truly believe in. I think our world needs them more than ever today. And to answer your question more specifically around understanding, again, I feel like I've said this so many times and I keep harping on it because I really truly believe in the values that I carry with this work and in my own life, is when you learn to understand why someone is the way that they are, then you realize it's really not about you. It's about things that go unhealed and unacknowledged. And most people who are in pain and hurting can't carry it alone, and they want someone else to carry it with them. And so that's where understanding has to come into play. Okay, I understand why this person is doing this. I'm going to depersonalize this. I'm going to understand that's really, truly not about me. Although I got hurt in the process, I got in the way. That's okay. That's what boundaries are for. That's what knowing my limits and having self-worth is. But I'm not going to allow somebody to treat me that way. But it doesn't mean I can't extend love and compassion to them because I understand why they are the way they are. I hope that answered your question.
No, it definitely does. And I agree. Those pillars of just like what the spiritual path is, I truly believe it is compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, love. I remember one time I took mushrooms and I had this whole awakening. I'm like, it's all about love. That's it. It's just love. It's literally just love. That's the answer to everything.
The Beatles were right.
Because it is the cure to all of the, or I shouldn't say it's the cure. I would say it's the answer to our ascension. Like anytime you're in a moment of resistance with another person, it's like just dropping into that, okay, let me accept what's happening. Let me understand. Let me have compassion. And then when I'm ready, I can love them. And there is almost this like karmic cycle that occurs in all of our lifelines and down the ancestral line if we're not leaning into those factors of love, forgiveness, acceptance. You're going to meet the same person in a different body in your next life. Sometimes I'll say that to my clients. I'm like, look.
Yeah, extending the love really is like, it's a healing balm for sure.
It's the curriculum that's in front of you. You're a soul that came here to learn the most.
Truly.
Yeah, I want to definitely dive more into this like idea of love, and also I want to add a little bit more into the cycle breaker and how within my own personal journey, there definitely was a chapter where I needed to kind of like distance myself, because it's in the part of your healing path where you're becoming aware of all your shadows, but you still haven't befriended them. So they still trigger you. So then when you're around family, obviously they're mirroring to you all the things that you're becoming aware of. And you're like, fuck, oh my God, like stop acting that way. But the only reason you have that like intense trigger is because we have yet to befriend that shadow within our own being. So there is almost like this little bit of like a period of where our spiritual ego grows and we're like, I'm better than every single person here. I'm not going to hang out with any of these people. And then you kind of get to this point where you're like, wait, what's going on here? Like the judgment is...
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say the judgment is just reflecting off of our own inner judgment and just that kind of like lack of befriending to the shadow aspects of ourselves.
We have a saying in Family Constellation Therapy, and I'm sure people say this elsewhere, but I've really only heard this through facilitators, and it's the more that you reject the people in your family, the more you actually embrace them, meaning you become more like them, because there's something around that shadow that you inherited that you also need to heal within yourself. So like the more you reject mom, the more you're going to become like mom, because there's something that needs to heal. The more you detach and invite love into the situation and you just see it from a different perspective, the more you're like, oh, actually, I can do things differently. Like I don't have to be just like that. But it also lessens that enmeshment that you can feel with mom, dad, whoever it is. And so, yeah, that hopefully is a helpful tool for people who are in rejection of a parent. Well, if you find that you're really similar to them, stop rejecting them and kind of lean into understanding them more, maybe having some compassion, and even going as far as finding love and forgiveness in whatever way that looks like for you. And maybe you'll start to see things from a different perspective.
Right. It's a straight mirror. A straight mirror. Always. Yep.
Would you
I feel like spirit always laughs. They're always just like, oh, wow, like you're rejecting that person. Well, let's take a look in the mirror, because it's, you didn't choose them for no reason.
Yeah. Well, would you explain, you mentioned enmeshment, and that's something that came up for me in my session, which is something I had like heard the term, understood it generally in the past, but had never really had the felt sense of it and the understanding of how that was present in my life. And I feel like it's pretty common and something that can be really kind of trickling below the surface that most people don't think about or consider as just a reasoning or a symptom of why they're stuck or not able to overcome some obstacle. So I would love to hear more about what an enmeshment is, and then I'd be happy to share also some details of what came up in my session around that as well.
Yeah, and we can talk through it too, but I look at enmeshment as also like entanglement. There's like kind of two sides of the same coin. It's a way to belong to someone in your family system unconsciously. So it's most of this work, right? Like most of FCT is like, how are we belonging to people in the family system too closely? Like we want the field to show us what we cannot see with our human eye or our mind. So you can think of enmeshment like when two things become enmeshed, they can come together. And in some ways that can be great because there's generational gifts, right? Like we need to acknowledge the generational gifts as much as we acknowledge the generational trauma. But if it's too close, it can really affect anyone's ability to move forward, to be in their proper role that we talked about earlier without taking on their parents' stuff. So I'll kind of explain it physically and then energetically, and that might resonate in different ways. Physically, enmeshment or entanglement can show up as lacking a sense of self or lacking autonomy, disassociation, being in zombie mode, survival mode, or like autopilot. Addiction is really common with being in enmeshment. If it's more like self-soothing the pain that we feel from others, and then also anything around the solar plexus, that's a little bit energetically, but more of the physical symptoms of a shadowed or kind of backwards working solar plexus. But energetically, it looks like being jumbled together with family members energetically and not knowing who you are and who they are. And there's a fine line with this, because we can also look at it through the lens of merging and identification, which are a whole other thing that I can explain. But there's no enmeshment, there's no clear boundary or separation of the self. So someone may have a little bit of sense of self, but still largely be enmeshed in unhealthy family dynamics. And I think this is the first way that we start to look at loyalty in the family system, because there's so many ways we want to look at how we stay bonded and belonging and out of order in our families in order to survive, protect, defend, cope, whatever. And so I think, we do this out of love. Like, we are loyal to our families because we think that if we love our family and our family loves us, then we will stay connected to them and we'll bond to them. But it can even show up in harmful ways. And so we feel that even though we're going to do it and it's harmful, it still keeps us connected. It keeps us alive. But even though we don't see this all the time in today's society, but we are tribal communal beings at our core. Having trust and connection and bonding with people in a really healthy way is actually something that our society is really missing out on. Like, we can track it all the way back to the beginning of time. So I think because we live in such a hyper independent and kind of robotic world at times, we forget that these parts of us these more primal parts of us can really help us understand why we do these things. Because at the end of the day, we do these things because we're looking to stay alive and survive. But my question to people is always like, at what cost? At what cost is the really important question for enmeshment.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like I feel called to share a bit about what came up in our session, because I was mentioning earlier that I come from a really close, tight-knit family, and I definitely also have become aware of that in adulthood as I've just stepped into more of my gifts and my pull to want to be of service and to be a light for my family is something I really enjoy doing, and I view as like a beautiful, part of my purpose in this life. And I think what was really powerful was I basically in our session was kind of working through this like dark cloud is what I called it, that I felt like was coming over me in my relationship with my partner, with my romantic partner, Milan. And I think I had this slight feeling that maybe it was related to, I didn't know explicitly that it was going to be family related, but I knew that there was something that was just sort of like left over that didn't really have to do with our relationship. And the discovery of understanding more vividly how I had been essentially enmeshed with a certain family member helped me to understand basically like all these things you're saying about why we do things out of love, and we do things because we're like, okay, I'm this self-aware young woman who is able to understand things really deeply, and my family members, rightfully so, see that and come to me for help, right? I feel like a lot of people can resonate with being like the therapist of their family. Like my younger brother jokes, like after him and I get off FaceTime, he's like, okay, like how much do I owe you? And it's funny because it's like, on the surface, it's like, haha, nothing, obviously. But then you start to realize that if you're not aware of that energetic entanglement, that it's actually eating away at other parts of your life. And so what I was feeling was that me and my partner couldn't really like step forward into the future that I wanted to for some weird reason. And then when I get all this new language and felt sense and realizations about the way that I'm energetically connected to my family, number one, it relieves a lot of just, the unknown of like, what's wrong with me? Like, is my partnership flawed? Like, what is happening? And number two, bringing the love and understanding to the family members or the specific people that I'm in this enmeshment with or am working through. And I'm someone who really benefits from having more colors on the palette, more language to a scenario. because intellectually it helps me understand. Then of course there's the felt sense of it. And I think what I'm getting at is, with this experience for me personally, I already felt this shift. And just because I saw this energetic tie and could physically feel how it wasn't letting me move forward with me and my partner on the same, line, and having like that family member be like mixed into that, is everything following that allowed me to actually provide love and support for that family member in a way that was actually healthier and more useful and more beneficial to everyone involved. And it just really reminded me and gave me an example of the ways that even our positive intentions and our closeness with people and our desire to be a healing force in the family, that it's important to bring more exploration and curiosity to that, to know that it's like the honoring of your own boundaries and your own energy and understanding how these things play out, and the people pleasing and all the other elements that come into it, of taking on the guilt of like, but I have to help this person, or like almost treating them as helpless, or like, what are they going to do without me? And it opens up a whole new avenue, I think, for exploring your relationship with your family than you had before.
What I hear you saying is that you are extremely aware now of the role that you hold in your family. And that, once you start doing any kind of family work, is very confronting. And it's very humbling, because you start to realize like, oh, I am the older sister who's like too motherly, too nurturing, a little controlling at times, because all I want to do is protect the babies, right? Like I just want to like, and that's based off of my own personal childhood experience, where as the oldest of 5, I felt I needed to play that role as mother in my family. Right. We could go into why, and it's not the place for it, but you could probably put 2 and 2 together of why I felt that way. And so I think that when you confront the role that you play in your family, again, this is where radical honesty comes in. Oh, you know what? Shit, I am controlling sometimes. And I am that annoying older sister. And I do want to be the peacemaker. But here's why. And then having people in your family understand you, why you feel that way. That's really healing too, because then that brings truth and clarity and honesty to your relationships. And it brings bonding and connectivity and intimacy into relationships. And then no one's guessing why people are a certain way. Because when you invite a lot of people into a family system, at least for me and my family, everybody is speculating and assuming, but nobody's talking to each other.
Right.
So when you put everybody in a room and you start understanding why everybody's in a certain role, you start getting a peek into people's real experiences of their family. And this goes into something that you both experience in FCT, as I asked you about your childhood story. I don't care about the facts. I care about when you recall your family story and your childhood story. What is a story that you're playing in your head? Because that's what's creating your role, and that's what's creating your reality right now.
That story, the title of that story really stuck out to me just then, because some people, I feel like there's a level of like understanding and awareness that we could kind of like accept and reach when we're doing this work, where we start to realize, holy shit, the way that I perceived my childhood was not absolute fact. It was literally just a lens and a perception. And you kind of start to unwind all those stories, and you realize like you have to like you're saying, like come to this level of acceptance and like honesty and integrity with yourself and say, okay, I was just a little child perceiving life through my individual lens. And what you saw as your story and the unfolding of the life of Kat or the life of Bella or the life of Nikki, it was just your own perception. Could you share a little bit about that and the impact that has on like how that does create our reality?
In what way?
I would say like the unfolding of our life as a manifestation of the perception.
Well, it goes back to, I think, many things that we've heard about the true nature of manifestation, which is alignment of energy. It's not about just thinking about something and something happens. It's about not only self-awareness of aligning self-awareness of energy within us, and then matching that energy with something else and how that creates our reality. But through the lens of our family, there's a I think what I'm understanding you saying is, and asking is, are there multiple parts of us that play into that? Is that right?
Yeah, you can go into that because now I'm intrigued with that.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because it's just the way that I look at the human self, right? Like there's a part of us that's DNA and epigenetics, but then there's a part of us that's like the soul. And I think we each part of that has its own DNA. Like the soul DNA is all the past lives that we've lived and all the experiences that we've had. And that information that's carried in that energy of light, right? Because it's where it's stored. And as consciousness. And then there's like the human self. And so when we're going into kind of healing, you know, these different parts of us, we have to pay attention to, and I think I'm answering your question, but we have to pay attention to the different parts of us that exist and how they all coincide with each other. Is that answering what you're saying?
Yeah. And now that you bring up what you just said about the ancestral energy and trauma being stored in the light, I want to ask more about that and this idea of junk DNA that you posted about on your story the other day, because I feel like this kind of matches up. Drop us into like what your theory is or your personal views on like junk DNA and where this information is stored and all the things.
You want me to basically geek out about soulic DNA and epigenetics?
Yes.
Go
Okay,
at it,
all
sis.
right. I will give you my long explanation and I will give some examples so it feels a little bit more tangible. But if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. But sometimes my friends joke I have a bit of a computer brain and I just love all this information. But basically, yeah, so let's start with epigenetics. I think it's a little bit more tangible to grasp. Epigenetics is basically the definition of the inheritance of certain gene expressions that occur not because there's any specific changes to our DNA itself, but actually how our environment has shifted our internal experience. So it's not an internal shift. It's like because something happened in our environment, something then reacted inside of us. And so with epigenetics, we're not just looking at nature versus nurture. It's actually important to recognize that in many ways, epigenetics says nature and nurture. And this is how we look at ancestral trauma as well. You know, what are we more predisposed to as a human, but also how were things happening in our environment that were traumatic that we were nurtured into through beliefs, patterns, behaviors, thoughts, etc. And so when we kind of inherit epigenetics, you know, because it's largely based on our environment of our ancestors and the things that they experienced, we're looking at how we carry that trauma, and how we carry that trauma can say a lot about our human experience. And to answer your previous question, can also shape how we build and create and choose our environments and how we manifest our human experiences. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But I think, as I've said, like we're more predisposed to carrying certain traumas in certain ways because of our family. But the nice thing with epigenetics is we're not stuck doing it that way. Like, you know, everyone says like, well, my family did it. Like I'm stuck that way forever. Like my mom or my dad has depression. Like I'm always going to have depression. And the beauty of epigenetics is that you're not stuck with it and you can change that gene expression. And it will take a lot of work, but it is possible. So that's like example number one, I guess, of how we carry physically like ancestral trauma in our bodies. But I think, you know, the beautiful thing, like I mentioned, is that we can influence genes' expressions and to change their expression based on the inner work that we do. So when we are able to rewire these experiences, even the ones that we may not have personally had, but we inherited, then we start changing our internal response to what triggered those genes to continue, I guess, in ways that aren't beneficial or positive. So yeah, that's kind of my epigenetic belief, but the soul DNA I can get into if you want to.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
please.
so this
We're like, take us down the rabbit hole. This is our favorite.
Deeper.
So yeah, this is where I hold some pretty far out but pretty steadfast beliefs about energetics of inheriting trauma that have to do with our soul. And I was talking to you both, actually. I was recently reading Journey of Souls again for the second time. And I'm on this kind of quest and like search to understand, okay, well, I know about epigenetics. Clearly, I'm geeked out about it. What about the soul component to this? And I've touched on it a little bit today when we've been chatting, but I wanted to understand, like, how the soul, like, here's my question. Where does the soul start and where does the human body begin? Like where, meaning like what comes first? Does the soul impact the human body? Does the human body act as a costume for the soul? Like I wanted to get into the nitty gritty of how they were really intertwined. And so in reading Journey of Souls again for the second time, I realized that our souls very much choose our human bodies that are predisposed to certain family patterns or DNA expressions or ancestral experiences. And the soul kind of snuggles its way into the human body, let's say, and is like, oh, this is the perfect human body for me to be able to grow as a soul. It's predisposed to all the right things for me, right? And so after that, I was left with the question of what does the soul impact then? Is there a soulic DNA that kind of comes into play? Like how do energetics work into all of this? And so Spirit calls it cosmic DNA. I'm kind of resonating more with like a soulic DNA. And so our soulic DNA is like all of our past lives. The soul, you know, and that's just one part of it. I feel now that I'm learning that the soul also connects to a part of us that is an energy we come into in a family system. So for example, there's a lot of war energy in my family because they directly were affected by the war in Lebanon. And I could write a book on how war energy in my family system has affected me. It's not a part of my soulic DNA, but it's a part of the energy of my family system. And so the soul, I find, will take on certain energies from a family system that are outside of the epigenetic realm for its evolution too. And I'm still in the process of trying to understand this fully, but I can share an example outside of war if that is helpful for you to understand more of the energetics.
Sure.
I think the best example is probably early deaths, meaning anyone who passed under 55, although I think probably these days we could make it closer to 60 because people are living until like 100 more commonly. But when someone dies early in a family system, it kind of creates like a black hole in the lineage that then each following generation will essentially fall into if people don't acknowledge the person who died early. They don't acknowledge their life or their soul or what happened to them. And I think, you know, many times when people die early, the obvious reason of why those things don't happen is because the trauma or the grief or the pain that it causes people to be in a state of remembrance for that person is so painful that we shut down honoring and memory to cope, right? It's just too painful for us. I lost my family lost my grandpa, my grandma, and my aunt within 13 months or 14 months. And it was very difficult for all of us to talk about things after that because it was so painful. And it's easier to just shut things down and not remember. But until that honoring or acknowledgement happens, you will see similar themes of following generations fall into that black hole. I want to preface by saying that if it was a baby, like due to a sudden miscarriage or an abortion or SIDS, let's say, you will see just a pattern of loss. And either way, anyone dying early always shows up as loss in the family. But if there's no other explanation as to why they passed, let's just say cancer or a car accident or something, you can probably guarantee most of the time there will be themes of loss and then another theme based on how they passed. And so I always say, like, the actions may not always look the same from generation to generation, but the theme will. So if I haven't lost you yet, here's a more specific example. If grandma suffered from miscarriages, let's just say she had like 4 miscarriages, and she never dealt with the loss, you or your mom may have some fear around loss, losing babies, losing your partners, losing your job, losing yourself, and most likely it'll show up around the same age. And you'll never fully understand why. And this is what FCT does. We go back to what happened, and we try to understand where are themes of loss present. And so that's why I say if you have a fear that makes no sense to you, you don't know where it comes from, you have to look at the ancestral part of it, because you could be deeply enmeshed in an ancestral pattern based on trauma from your ancestors that you have no clue even happened.
Wow. I'm like processing.
I told you.
But
I didn't go through the rabbit hole of this stuff, but
I love
this is
it.
the stuff I really like.
Well, it's reminding me, I'll share a little bit of the details within the session that we had together. And just to drop the listeners into a little bit of my story, I have an aunt that I did not meet because she had passed away prior to me being born. She died in a car accident. I think she was either 20 or 21. And that was one of the family figures that came up for me in our session. And it was pretty wild because I had not even connected the dots that, first of all, I've always felt this very strange connection to her. My mom went to a medium once, and the medium told her that one of your daughters has a piece of your husband's deceased sister's soul within her. And growing up, I played her flute. It was like something that my dad wanted me to do. He was like, if you join the band, can you play the flute? And can you play Aunt Betty's flute? So just to give you guys some details, I've always felt this like very deep connection to my aunt that I never even met before. And it was so interesting because right before we had our session, like a few weeks before, I started having these dreams of me being in a car accident. And every single dream, I probably had about 4 of them, and they were all different types of car accidents. And they were so vivid and so real to the point where I would literally feel the energy in my body of like I know exactly what it feels like to be in a car accident. And I've been in a light bumper to bumper, but like nothing to the extent that I experienced in these dreams. And they were these like visceral, intense nightmares that I would then wake up as soon as I would get hit with the impact. And during the dream, I remember it so clearly because I would wake up right at the death. So usually when you wake up like in the midst of a dream, you are more likely to remember it. So these dreams are like pretty detailed for me. And I remember that right before I would die in the car accident, there was this point where I get hit, I lose control of the car, and I have to like consciously decide in my head to let go. And it's almost like that journey of the soul leaving the body prior to the actual like really hard impact where it would really hurt and be painful for the physical body. Mm-hmm. And I can literally like conceptualize it in my head, like what that process is like. Like you get hit, you lose control, and then you have to say, just let go. Like you're okay. You're safe to surrender. And then as soon as I do that, I wake up. And then I had the session with you and I was like, wait a damn minute. I didn't even connect the dots that these dreams could have been a sign that I was maybe reliving ancestral trauma or soulic. What were you labeling?
Yeah, what I hear you saying is that there's a piece of your aunt's soul that left to come into you, which souls can do. They can break into different parts and it doesn't affect their intensity of their soul. It's just light moves. Right. And there was something coming into you that needed to heal. I think you'll probably touch on this with a certain person in your family, and that you were the perfect conduit for it. But that's more soul DNA because there's a past life of someone else's soul that's existed in you for the purpose of healing something.
Right.
Because you never had that experience yourself, and your dad never had that experience. So it's not truly epigenetic.
Right. And how crazy, I emailed you this about 2 weeks ago, that I found out she passed away 2 days before my birthday. Not the same year, but like, I think she died on March 8th and I was born on March 10th. And my grandma, who's in the same lineage, she also passed away on March 11th. And I'm starting to realize that there's like this pattern of energy that occurs like during that time period in obviously my family's life. And I emailed you and I'm like, does this have meaning? And do you want to share a little bit of what you said about dates?
Oh, dates are, yeah. I mean, well, it's like, it's just like how and I don't know exactly what I said, so I apologize, but I think I said something along the lines of the body holds energy around dates. So it's like, for me, when I hear that, I hear, okay, epigenetically, there may be a lot of resonance around a certain time of date or year, where there's like a lot of grief or loss and the body acts as an alarm clock and it just kind of comes on. The body knows at this time of year in the deep subconscious, there's like a heightened awareness around something or a deep grief and it comes up and then you just kind of move through it and it passes. but also there could be a deeply soulic part of that as well. What I hear and feel for you when I talk about it more than referencing the email is that when you're in that time of the year is like the deepest time for you to connect with yourself. It's like the deepest time for you to be in ceremony with yourself, in meditation with yourself, almost like closing the doors to extrovertedness and really just being inward with yourself and honoring those parts of yourself, because in many ways, whether it's soulic or whether it's epigenetic, those are pieces of you in you. Your grandmother you were in your grandmother as an egg when she was alive. So there is not only that piece that lives in you through her, or in her through you, but also there's that soul part of it as well, where the soul remembers, I died on this day, or I was born on this day, or this, there's that resonance with it. It all comes back to energy for me. I don't put anything past energy. I really don't. Everything is energy.
It's so crazy you say that about that time of the year, because I always kind of like chalked it up to just it being my birthday and like new year, new me. But now that I'm thinking back to like when I first began this awareness, healing, spirituality journey, my birthday has always been like my January 1st for me. And when I think back to the times where I like go into a little bit of hermit mode and I'm like really in alignment, it always starts around that time period. And I think I was even sharing this with Bella, how we were just talking about how we don't really resonate with the whole like new year. It doesn't feel the same as like what it used to when you like kind of fall into the terminology and like the societal programming of capitalism being like, Happy New Year, like buy the gym membership now and do all the things and get this juice cleanse. But now, like when you really tune into your own intuition and your energy, you can figure out like what that time period is for you, where you want to really go into that period of like starting fresh, like the shedding has occurred and now it's time to really recalibrate. And that time period for me is always where I feel the closest connection to myself, like how you're saying. I also wanted to share one other thing before I forget, that after we had our session, I was FaceTiming with my aunt, who is the sister of the aunt who passed away, and my dad. And it was on Thanksgiving, actually. I was in California still, and they were together for the holidays. And I was FaceTiming them, and I was telling them about the session. And I was just asking more questions about my Aunt Betty. And that was when I found out the date that she passed. And my aunt told me something really crazy, that she once found a book, like pretty closely after she passed away. And my aunt had written in the book, is a car a blessing or a curse? How fucking crazy is that?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wait, who wrote that? The aunt who passed away? Or
Yep.
Oh my God. The soul knows. It's weird.
Wow.
It's
Isn't
weird.
that crazy?
It's crazy.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I don't love that, but I also think it's like so.
no, it's just
Yeah.
alignment. Like
Crazy,
it makes
for sure.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of was like validation hearing that sometimes the soul has, not sometimes, I would say most of the time, there's just like a predetermined plan for a soul. And it's interesting to think about the complexities of the car accident itself, because there was another person who was the driver of the car that hit her, and he had just left the doctor's office after having his eyes dilated. And I don't know if it like wasn't a rule back then that you shouldn't drive, or he was just like not listening and he was driving. But my aunt told me, she's like, you know what, Nick, it's so interesting. I never felt anger towards him ever. My aunt that's still alive. She's like, I never once felt anger towards that man. And she was telling me on the phone the other day when we were talking, she was like, I regret not saying to him that it's okay. And she never called him or anything. And I'm sure he passed away now because he was probably older. But she's like, I still think that like I should have gave him a call, because I'd never felt one like drop of anger. And my grandma, my nan, the mother, my aunt was telling me she passed away, my grandma, at 101, almost 100.
Wow.
She was saying that she never mentioned or talked about that man. So I would think that she still holds on to like maybe a little bit of anger and frustration and just like a block towards that human. But I thought that was interesting as well that my aunt told me that, and how I would say advanced her soul is in the act of forgiveness.
It's a gift. That's a generational gift.
Mm.
I will say, from the lens of FCT, when somebody impacts someone's life to that extent, meaning taking a life, or I can give a personal example of what happened in my family, that person becomes a part of your family system. They just, because that man unfortunately took the life of your aunt unintentionally, he's now involved in that family system because of the impact he had on it. And so it's important that in the future, if you ever felt called to, we address that specific scenario. And maybe it will be important for you because you do carry a piece of her soul, that we address removing him from the family system in some energetic way so that there can be liberation and peace in that as well. And I'll give a personal example of that in my own life too. Is I had my dad is the youngest of 5. He had an older brother who was completely normal and healthy, and then when he was in the birthing process, he got stuck and the doctors tried to take him out with metal forceps and mentally deformed his skull. And he basically was raised in a nunnery and passed at 9 years old. And within the lens of FCT, that doctor still impacted the unfortunate fate of my uncle's life. Even if it was chosen, it was still part of the unfortunate fate that he suffered. And he was a part of all of that. So when I was born, I got stuck in the womb. And the doctors wanted to use metal forceps to pull me out. And this is how trauma is, when it's unhealed and unacknowledged, gets passed down. And my dad said, absolutely not. And they ended up pushing me back up a bit. That's the story I was told. I don't know if that's biologically correct, but that's the story I was told. And my mom had a C-section because they were not going to risk that trauma happening again. So these are all gifts that our families give us because of the trauma when you have certain awareness. And sure, there's a lot of pain with it, but it's important to take into consideration the unknowingly involved human beings in our family system and how they affect us, because it impacts the way that our family system is structured.
Do you believe that, let's say that trauma is passed down with, let's say, the man that hit my aunt? Do you believe that then me living my lifetime now would then carry some energetic frequency that would perfectly align with someone else's karmic lessons that would kind of like emulate the same type of trauma and lesson of that man, like meeting the same type of lesson in a different body? You know what I'm saying?
I think it's super specific to the soul. I think it's super specific to what the soul wants to experience. If that person is just a part of the experience, I don't know for sure. I think let me ask really quick, if you don't mind. Hold on. Yeah, I just feel like it's just a part of the experience. It's not the full, if I'm answering your question correctly.
I was going to circle back to the dates conversation because I have these like very interesting relationship to dates and different like things that I've learned in my life that have to do with dates. And I am really curious, Kat, for your take on this. And maybe it's like nothing, coincidence, whatever, but I feel like maybe there's something to it. For one, I've always had a really good memory of dates and their importance. So like, for example, anniversaries, first kisses, first dates, like all these different things I historically, and this really happened in the stages of like 16 to like 25 years old. I just really remember dates and like have them noted in my head, and I'll like bring them up to my partner or something and he'll be like, how, like, do you remember that? So I've always had this affinity toward marking the significance of dates. And another really interesting thing is my Milan, my partner, his birthday is one day apart from my younger brother. They're September 20th and September 21st, making them the same like zodiac Virgos. And then Milan's sister and I also have birthdays one day apart, making us both Capricorns. Also, my birthday falls on an Argentine holiday that is like Christmas related. Milan's sister's birthday, January 7th, is the Orthodox Christmas in Serbia. And I always thought that that was interesting. And I've always really deeply believed that something about Milan and I's relationship, and now knowing all this stuff about souls, is I've just always felt like there's been this cosmic divinity to us being totally like created for each other to find each other. And there's this feeling in the relationship that was really just the process of like falling in love with him, was also feeling this cosmic beauty that is really hard to explain. And we've always like felt that we have this entanglement in a beautiful way of like, you can't describe one atom without the other. And that's how we've always felt about each other. So with the dates, it felt very significant. And I was like, that is crazy that both we have two, you know, sets of people with birthdays a day apart. The other experience I've had with dates is I've always had a really close affinity and relationship to a writer and speaker named Alan Watts. And I actually thought of him in this conversation because he has a quote about souls that he says, we think that the soul resides inside the body, but the body lives inside the soul. And anyways, in the beginning of my spiritual journey, I felt like I ran into or was brought Alan Watts's work through his books. And I dove into his lectures and his writings, and it just lit something up in me that I'd never experienced before. When I would listen to his lectures, it put me in this ability to like channel, understand knowledge. Like I would just download complete understandings of like Eastern philosophy. And every time I listen to his voice, I feel so connected to him. And then a few months into reading his work, I found out that him and I have the same birthday, January 6th. And I felt, even if it was, you know, just, you know, something I made up in my head, that I was like, I feel really connected to him. And even when I first learned how to channel and connect with guides, he was one that came through and is someone who I would speak to and even like, you know, channel, you know, either guidance from him or just almost like hear him in his lecturing voice in my head and be able to like extrapolate these whole huge explanations or understandings. And then I looked up my gene keys and his gene keys, and we share two of the same of the four major gene keys. And anyway, I'm just curious for your take on that. And I know obviously sometimes it's like, how do you know what it means? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's coincidence. We just make it meaningful because it feels nice. But I just thought of all those things because of the conversation around dates and their significance, and me being someone who really puts a lot of significance on dates and birthdays and like just the perfection of when things come into existence.
I mean, each day has an energy, has a significance, right? Whether it's astrological or whether it holds a significance on a day, absolutely, if you resonate with a certain day. My boyfriend's birthday is also January 6th, so I'm like partial to, and my aunt's birthday is also January 6th, so that's
wow,
a really cool day. But yeah, I think you know, it makes me think of a while ago I had a shamanic journey with a friend of mine, and she said that goddess Bridget was like here and with me, and I was like, I tried to talk to her multiple times and I didn't really feel much. I was just like, I don't know why you're here and you won't really talk to me, so I don't know what your purpose is, but you're here. And I just had another shamanic experience with someone different. I want to say like a month ago, and she asked me for my birthday, and she said, "Oh, you're on Goddess Bridget's same birthday, like her feast day is your birthday." And I was like, "Huh." Well, that other person didn't know, obviously, but she could tell that Goddess Bridget was like in my sphere of people that I work with or that I could work with, and I didn't realize it was because we shared a day together. So I think there's like a vibrational resonance with dates and people that share those dates. And I think that, you know, even though time is so different on the other side, I think, you know, the reason that we connect to dates on Earth is because it gives us meaning and it gives us purpose and it gives us something to connect to. And I think that probably says a lot more about maybe what you're feeling about the connection with dates over anything else is that
Mm.
there's an energy or a fondness or a love for sharing dates with people that you care about, and it's a point of connection.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I love that. Speaking of birth dates and zodiac related things, I know that you are a reflector, correct? In human design?
Yeah, I'm a 5-1 reflector.
Amazing. I wanted to ask you as an opportunity also to hear more about kind of the personal side of things of how you really just like as an individual, as a healer. One, I'm so curious. I don't know many reflectors, and I know it's very special when you have a reflector in your life because they, like the word says, reflect so many things back to you. And I'm convinced, I'm sure it's why you are so gifted at what you do. But I just wanted to hear, number one, what you have felt in your own experience as being a reflector. For those who don't know, we talk a lot about human design on the podcast. I'm actually in the process of getting my reader certification because I'm so fascinated by it. But reflectors are an energy type in which you have all the different energy centers in the body in the chart, and when none of them are filled in or they're undefined, it's what makes you a reflector, and it's essentially being super receptive and open, and you really just take in and interpret the world in such a unique way. But I would just love to hear a little bit about what that is like, number one, and how it relates to your work as a healer, as an FCT practitioner, and yeah, just some reflector wisdom in that.
What I know about being a reflector is absolutely exhausting sometimes. It's like being a reflector is constantly being aware of what's around you and how it's affecting your experience and looking at how all other things reflect each other. And you just see the connections between everything all the time. And it can be exhausting if you don't know how to use it. And I
Mm-hmm.
will say that most of my life, not understanding how my intuition works, 'cause I think our intuitions all work specific to our unique gifts and talents. And I think this past year in 2023, I've had to really accept that the way that, and this ties into being a reflector, the way that my intuition works is that I see the things people don't want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really disruptive for a lot of people. And so people will pay for a session to come and have me tell them the things that they don't want to see, but then it's really hard for them. And then I feel really bad because I'm like, well, this is really hard for me because you want it, but you don't want it. And I'm really confused. Like,
Yeah.
it's a really uncomfortable place for me to be. Um, and if I look at it through the lens of being an empath, it softens that pressure that I feel and that
Mm-hmm.
intensity because what a gift that I can see what people can't see, but can I also have the wisdom and the maturity and the emotional maturity and the tools and the skill set to provide people with ways that they can actually believe that they can be empowered by the things they didn't want to see
Mm-hmm.
rather than feeling like it's burdensome, right?
Right.
And so I think as a reflector, you have to be uber conscious of the responsibility that you hold of having that kind of awareness of seeing how things work and how people reflect off of each other and how things are intertwined. And as far as my own life, I have a hard time reading into things too much, over analyzing, being too aware of energy. I have to really protect myself. I have to shut off. Most of my friends are not at all spiritual. If they are, it's on their own spectrum. It's not like how I am in my work. I need to be around really humanly grounded people who don't really care too much about this stuff. Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, as a reflector, I will constantly just be picking up on things. And if someone else is super intuitive, at times I'm just like, this is way too much. Like, I can feel them, they can feel me. We're all feeling each other, and it's just too much. I want
Yeah.
someone to go watch Love is Blind with on the couch and drink a glass of wine or and like just bake a cookie. Like it can be a little exhausting. So I think I'm learning how to incorporate all these parts of myself while also still being a grounded human being that's not uh,
Mm-hmm.
overly spiritually involved.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's beautiful that you bring up the learning curve of because each of us, and especially with being specific to human design, every aspect of us, especially our gifts and our life theme, it has a learning curve or like a shadow expression that can often feel at first like maybe you're a victim to it or it's just like very difficult. But it's that journey of embracing what you came here with and viewing it as the perfection of, your soul, your body came together to have these perfect gifts, to have this setup so that you could go about your life and learn to lean into the gifts. And I mean, it's just so evident in you when we speak, and just this whole our session and this whole interview, I've just felt this sense of you having, you can feel that there's actually a very groundedness and like a sureness to who you are. And I can just imagine, as being a reflector, the work that takes to honor and understand how you work and to not let everything just come in and take over, and the process of curating your environment and just knowing what you need to thrive. And I think it's just a beautiful example of how we can, use these tools of understanding ourselves to lean in further to our purpose and our gifts and our role as a healer, creator, visionary, whatever we are. So it's an honor to be able to like just speak. I'm like, you're like a cool reflector. They're so rare. I think it's 2% of the population are reflectors. So I'm just always interested. And I think you can always feel the kind of like specialty to that. I mean, we're all obviously special, but that uniqueness to the soul and to a person that holds that capacity to reflect back to us, because it's so important and so needed. So I just wanted to hear more about it from you, purely because I'm just fascinated by it. So
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about human design, but I do know that being a reflector is kind of rare. And then, just reading the things I see on like Jenna Zoe's page of like my human design, I'm also like, yep, that's me.
yeah,
Yes, that's me. And there's always like I have to accept that part of me, and I also have to embrace that part of me too.
totally. Yeah. Amazing. Nikki, is there any other lingering questions that you want to ask before we tie this up nicely?
I was gonna say, how whenever people have podcasts, they'll like have one question that they ask the same question after every interview.
Yeah.
I was like trying to think. I'm like, what's a question like we could start asking people? And my mind goes, what does it mean to be out of your mind?
Oh my God. Honestly, I'm down actually. I would like to know the answer to that, at least for Kat. Maybe I don't know if we make it it's a good question for it to be the last one. It ties it all together.
There's so many ways you can go with it too.
Yeah, true. I'm down.
I can
Let's do
answer
that
it
one.
if you want me to.
Yeah.
I just got to think about it for a second.
The irony.
Huh. What does it mean to be out of your mind? God, I could go so literal with this, or I could go like so existentialist with this.
The latter.
Yeah, we like the least sense is what we like.
Okay, here's what I will say. When I think of being out of your mind, I think of the wisdom the body holds and how much that relates to family constellation therapy is, and I always say this every time after we open the field, we've been in the mind, it's time to drop into the wisdom of the body. And getting out of the mind and dropping into the wisdom of channeling on each paper, to me, through the lens of what I do and what I'm here to speak on, it's powerful to get out of the mind and to really allow the body to show you the truth of your family and the truth of what's keeping you stuck. And then also at the end, the truth of liberation as you speak to each family member, as we channel the healing statements. And as you feel that felt sense in your body, that there is a shift and a change happening, just as you spoke to, Bella. So I think that there is a beauty to the mind and a power to the mind. But when you allow yourself to drop out of that and get into the body, being out of your mind is pretty freaking cool when it comes to family constellation therapy. So that's the way I would answer that question.
Hell yeah.
I love it. That's
love
amazing.
it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. So good. Well, This was amazing and such a joy. And I already know that the Omis are going to get so much out of this. I had my own aha moments and revelations. It's such a joy to be able to bring these really important and powerful modalities and tools and just ways of being to the community. So just as a final question, I would love to know if there's a final piece of wisdom you would tell anybody who is maybe kind of in the mud right now with things, and then after that, where people can find you and what the best way to connect with you is.
I think that whenever I want to give some kind of parting wisdom from any conversation I have around family constellation therapy, it brings me back to the idea of being a cycle breaker. If you're drawn to this work, if you're drawn to this episode, if you're drawn to the things that are coming up in conversation, know that that's some kind of resonance within you and maybe even your soul, that there is a piece of that story in you too, that your soul is here to experience. And if you don't feel worthy or good enough or feel that you can make a difference in your family, trust me, it's not true. You can. About 6 years ago, I did a reading with a woman named Kelly White. It was just an intuitive reading. And she's like, no, you're going to heal your family and you're going to be like a cycle breaker. And I was like, I'm not good enough for that. Like, I don't think they care enough. And here I am. And they don't know half the work that I do, but I am helping heal my family. And I am a cycle breaker. So even if you don't feel worthy that you can do those things, that doesn't dictate the power that you still hold, even if you don't recognize it, but there's a resonance to change your family and to do things differently and to carry a different story and a new image in your family system. And then as far as sharing goes, I'm pretty minimal. I have a website, it's katdaou.com. And then on Instagram, it's kat_Daou. And I like to keep it simple.